Hi, welcome to another edition of Community Cafe. I'm your host, Datta Khalsa, and I have with us this evening Annrae Angel and Peggy Volkmann, who is also on her, campaign committee.
That's
so
correct.
Thank you both for joining us, and
Thank you.
let's get into, I suppose, the discussion. So I understand you've run twice before. This is your third campaign, or?
No, I ran for judge one other time in Santa Clara County in 2014.
Okay. And what was what's the drive? What's the impetus? Because obviously it's long hours. There's a lot of pressure. What would drive you to want to become a Superior Court judge?
I think that I have a lot of ideas about what might help Santa Cruz County change the culture into something that is more in line with what the state is thinking about as far as juvenile justice and as far as restorative justice and different things of that nature. I think that sometimes things get stuck in a certain way, and new ideas can change things up a little. And I don't know if it will take some time, but I'm willing to do it and work to make the court system a little more friendly, I think.
So let's go down that path a little further. So speaking of the current culture, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 things that you would want to change? Or what are you seeing that's not being done correctly in your opinion?
It's not a matter of not being done correctly. It's a matter of doing something differently.
Okay.
And I think that we can do something differently in general, and it's not just Santa Cruz County, but it's the entire state with juvenile justice.
Specifically what?
Too often have I seen juveniles and young adults who commit crimes that then they are stuck with for the rest of their lives. And the research, the science has finally caught up with what every parent of a teenage child has known throughout the ages, and that is that teenagers do things that don't make any sense. And I think when we try to use the current justice system and the way that we look at things in a very black and white way with those young people whose brains aren't working, I think we end up creating problems that go far, far into their futures, and then it affects the community as well, far into the future. But if we can take the science and use it to understand the kids better, I think we can avoid those future problems that we could have if we were able to do programming or restorative justice with those young people. I think we would have a better...
that term restorative justice, do you want to educate our viewers? What do you mean exactly? What's the philosophy of restorative justice?
I think it's trying to put things back the way they were, and it's trying to make sure that individuals are responsible for the things that they've done that are wrong. And don't get me wrong, there are certain cases where nothing I'm saying is applicable, and there's prison and jail and trials, and the rest of those things that we've traditionally used will be the result.
But give me an example of restorative justice that would illustrate a good use of it.
Well, there was something that we used to do. I've worked both sides in Santa Clara County and in Santa Cruz County. And there was a time in Santa Clara County where anybody who was painting graffiti could basically avoid prosecution if they agreed for a year to be on a painting abatement team where they would be supervised by local officials, law enforcement officials, and they would have a certain area that they were required to keep painted. So that became their territory to somewhat protect. Yes.
And then they gained some sense of empathy
Yes.
for what's involved in undoing what they had done.
Exactly. And so they knew, exactly right. And I think those kinds of things are easy to do. They take a little bit of effort. They take commitment from the community and from everybody else. But I think we can do that. And then that also reduces the vandalism and the graffiti because those individuals aren't doing it anymore. And it may even go further than that. If those individuals are telling their friends, hey, knock it off. It's sort of a trickle-down theory of good behavior, I guess.
So it's restorative as opposed to punitive.
Right.
So let's speak a little bit to how would you characterize your career in law? You say you've been on both sides, so you've been a prosecuting, you've been a defending attorney,
No,
or mostly on the defense side?
Mostly on the defense side. When I was in law school, I was a clerk at the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had been in college at Sonoma State, I also was an intern for the District Attorney's Office in Santa Rosa. So that was my experience with the prosecutor's side. Then when I got out of law school, I did civil for a while, and then decided that I wanted to go back to what really drew me to law school, which was the criminal side of things. And at that time, it could have been either way, defense or prosecution. And ultimately, I ended up working with defense attorneys, and that's the direction that I went, and that's where I was for many, many years, 25 years. I did do some family law within that time frame. I was a sole practitioner, so I had the freedom to do the work that I would be hired to do. Most of my work was indigent defense appointed by the court for individuals who couldn't afford attorneys.
The public defender
In
in that realm.
Yes,
somewhat.
yes,
Okay.
absolutely. It's basically when the public defender's office can't represent somebody because of a conflict of interest, it goes out to a panel of private attorneys, and then there's a supervisor who appoints the private attorneys or suggests to the court the appointment.
So you have with you Peggy. You've joined us. So what would you say are the best attributes that Annrae represents compared to what's out there currently?
Right. I also have been a public defender for over 30 years, and through those, my time as a public defender, I got to know Annrae Angel as a fellow defense attorney. And Annrae is incredibly hardworking. She is not afraid to ask a question if she doesn't understand something. She's not someone who's going to just say, oh, I know that, without consulting with a lot of resources and really coming up with a good answer. Besides working really hard, she has a very good way with people. And I've never seen her get really flustered or upset with people, which I think is an excellent quality for a judge to have, temperament-wise, because you can, when you're in court, a lot of times your buttons do get pushed. And I know personally I'm a little bit more volatile than she is, but I never saw her lose her cool or be disrespectful to anybody on the other side, or judges or her clients. And to me, that's an extremely important quality. Also, I think she's very courageous, and I think one of the best qualities that a judge can have is to have courage to do what is right and what the law requires, regardless of what public pressure says they should do, or
No political pressure.
no political pressure. And I do come from a little bit of a unique situation because I'm married to a judicial officer, and so I am familiar with what I believe makes a good judge. And I think her temperament, her willingness to work and do any assignment that she is assigned to is excellent.
So there have been, I know there was a judge in Arizona who was pretty famous for some restorative justice, making a defendant wear a T-shirt that said some public message, or things that would help change the behavior or make an unorthodox solution to just putting someone behind bars. Do you have any, heroes in the restorative justice arena? Good, justices out there, or judges rather, who are out there doing it right now that you would point to and say, okay, that's someone that's doing a good job of it. This is along the lines of what I would do. Some examples of the graffiti example was a good one. Some other examples of specific judges who you think are going along the right path.
Well, I'm not. I think it's a new restorative justice is something that's been talked about for years and years and years, but it's new to the courts. However, Santa Clara County has a judge, Stephen Manley, and Judge Manley has, for his, as long as I've been in Santa Clara County working over there, which has been 25 years, he's had drug court And it has, the drug court was a way to take people into the court system and give them the services that they needed in the courtroom. So he would bring the providers into the courtroom and then tie them together with the defendants. He also has, in the past 10 years or so, started a veterans court, and I think we have some of both of those in Santa Cruz County, small calendars of veterans court and drug court. Over there, he devoted a whole department to that, and now I believe there's going to be a second department opened up. And the idea there is to try to get the services to the people that need them and try to encourage them to do better for themselves. With regard to the example you used about wearing a t-shirt or something like that, I don't know that story from Arizona, but I do know that I've heard and read judges doing things that shame people. And I don't agree with any of that. I don't think that you can shame anybody into doing the right thing. All you do is embarrass them and make them feel bad. I don't think you should shame anybody in court. I think people get there for various reasons. They don't want to be there. They'd rather be doing anything than be in court. And I think that the best way that you can get people to recognize their failings and the things that they've done to get themselves there is to let them talk about it, not to shame people or make them feel bad about it, but let them reflect on what they've done. And then they're going to reflect on doing something different for themselves rather than listening to a judge or anybody saying
or give them a
negative
chance
things.
to see the other side, as in with the graffiti.
Exactly.
Have some empathy.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
And look at the victims that are in the courtroom. There are always victims in the courtroom with given cases. Let that person, rather than worrying about themselves and what's happening to them, if they're being shamed or embarrassed, they're more capable of looking and seeing the perspective of a victim if they are paying attention and not just feeling blocked.
So it seems like, just to play devil's advocate, that would work to an extent, but if you're dealing with somebody who has no conscience, who's a sociopath, I mean, can you as a judge make that determination where this is a case where restorative justice isn't going to work because they've, clearly not, they're not necessarily wired to get that kind of a message?
Absolutely, and I think, as I said earlier, there are certain cases that are just going to be tried. They are just going to be prison cases. There's just not much anybody can do about it at some point.
So this is an extra stop along the way, just in case.
I think you start with the idea that people want to do better for themselves. And I think sociopaths are the minority. They certainly exist, but they're the minority. Oftentimes you have people that have been mistreated themselves. And if you can show those people that the system cares about them as a person, we don't like what they've done. We don't, it's the whole thing. I don't know. I had a preschool teacher tell me once about children, and the way that their theory is that there are no bad children, they only do bad things. And so there's sort of the same theory that I've worked with throughout my career is there are no bad defendants, they only do bad things. Now that's not always true. Sometimes there's a small percentage of people that are just, for whatever reason,
Wired that way.
It's just the way it is. But for the most part, and my experience with my clients has been that when they are in the situation they are in, they feel shame themselves and they wish that they could have done something differently or had a different way of handling a situation. And so that is the way that they can get through it and perhaps not do it again if they can see it like that.
Can you cite some studies in terms of recidivism rate for restorative justice versus punitive justice? I'm sure there are some cases or some studies you can reference, or is this something that's so new that hasn't really been compared as far as the results of one versus the other?
There may be some studies, I don't know them. I know anecdotally there are many people who feel like restorative justice is something that makes everyone feel better in certain circumstances, as well as victims, because then they can understand the thinking. Sometimes if you don't understand the thinking of a perpetrator, because your brain goes everywhere and you think of all sorts of things, and then when you finally find out what actually was going on, I wish I could remember the name. I read a book recently that was, I'm going to say it wrong, but I think it was 57 bus or 50. Anyway, it's a story, it's a factual story about a very horrible crime. And it's a long story, so I'm not going to go into it. But ultimately, what happened is that the victims and the family of the victims, long after the process had gone through the court system, got letters that the defendant had written within the first couple of days of the events, but the letters weren't given to the victims because that's not the way the process works, because defense attorneys want to protect their clients in the sense that, you know, you don't want to necessarily give those letters out until a later date. But
And
the family...
those letters would have, I take it, they would have helped the healing process?
I think so. And they did, ultimately, in this story. Ultimately, the family said, I wish we'd have known that before.
That's the 57 bus, a true story of two teenagers and the crimes that changed their lives.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, voice from above.
That's exactly what it was. So I had it right, 57 bus.
So.
And it was a remarkable story, and it's a quick read. I mean, anyone who wants to read it will get a really, really good education about what restorative justice can do, and it's a true story.
And am I correct that your intention or your belief is that this restorative justice is probably more likely to be applied in juvenile cases as opposed to adult cases, or are you looking to do it across the board?
I think you have to look at what the case is and what the charges are and what the damage is and what's going on, and then make that decision on an individual basis. You also have to check in with the victims and the victims' families and see where they're at as far as what they need, because we don't want to forget about that. And
So you would you would poll them and say, here's what I'm thinking about. What, you know, option A is put them in for life. Option B is, or I mean, how does it go? I mean,
you sort of jumped from an area where restorative justice can be successful on a grand scale to life in prison. So that's sort of a different idea. I think that in life cases, you're going to have a completely different circumstance. But the 57 bus case was a life case, and ultimately it worked out in a different way. But I think as a judge, you have to sort of open those ideas with the lawyers, with the prosecution, with the defense attorney. I think the judge should probably not order any of that to happen, because it can be destructive to the process and destructive to the participants. But I think judges can encourage lawyers to ask their, victims' families and defendants' families if there is something that would be agreeable.
Interesting.
And it's kind of a collaborative
sounds
sort
like
of situation.
much more open collaborative process than the historic, robes up on high.
Absolutely.
So Peggy, Annrae had talked about a culture of the justice system locally that perhaps needs improvement. Can you speak to what your perception of that culture is and what you feel like needs to be improved? I mean, what galvanized you into supporting this?
Well,
there had to be something.
Yes, exactly. Just a brief addendum to why she came into this race is that there was an incumbent judge who had come under scrutiny for her behavior and had been sanctioned by the body that makes determinations whether judges should be continuing to do their job or not.
Is this regarding the speeding ticket incident?
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. And so Annrae believed that judges matter and that Santa Cruz County could do better than having her continue as a judge. So is
the issue more about the personal behavior as opposed to the record on the bench?
No, it had to do with the record on the bench
as well.
Also.
Okay.
Yes, and
so I think the personal behavior made the headlines. Let's go to the record on the bench a little bit more.
Right. But there was a lot that happened on the bench, and so I think Annrae felt like if no one runs against her, then it'll be status quo, and so.
In terms are they in 4-year increments?
6.
6. So it's a long time we're looking at.
Right. Yeah. And so Annrae stepped up to somebody that had been a judge and was an incumbent, which is a very difficult thing to do, to run against a sitting judge people don't know judges, and so when they see incumbent on the ballot, they kind of vote that way. And so she stepped up to do that. So my perspective is that it's a bench of 12 people, and you have to have all 12 people doing their job and doing it well. And I believe that the culture there is that there needed to be somebody to come in and be able to do all the assignments without blowback from the attorneys who wouldn't appear in front of that judge. So I see that more as the need for her to come forward and run. Of course, everybody would like to see more programs and restorative justice, but in reality, there's a lot of issues with finances and the ability to do that.
Can we talk just a little bit more specifically in terms of issues with decisions or how things have been handled on the bench? Maybe like one thing in particular?
With regard to Judge Simons?
Yes.
I can address that,
Okay.
actually. There's a lot of anecdotal information, but I've never wanted to listen to or talk about or repeat any of the anecdotal information. But the thing that, the reason that I decided in August to run was because, as Peggy said, I didn't feel like a judge who had the record that she did should go, even if I was to lose against an incumbent, she should at least be opposed, and there should be at least an option. So the thing that, the incident that is part of the censure that I thought from a legal perspective was very difficult to ignore was during a trial, there was a question from the jurors during their deliberations, and she addressed it with the district attorney and she didn't address it with the public defender. And I don't believe that it was an intentional act. It was just something that she did, and ultimately she gave the defendant such a good sentence that it wasn't going to get appealed, that question. And that to me was the problem with what happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So your approach would have been obviously to include both sides in that. That's protocol that's required.
Exactly. That's the rule. You don't have ex parte conversations with one side and not the other, unless there's an agreement of some sort or it's about dates and times and insignificant things that the other side is going to hear. This was a significant question that she didn't inform the attorneys of, and it came to light during conversations with jurors after the fact. So whether it was intentional or not, it seemed to be a problem that was big enough, along with some of the other things, that she should at least be opposed. But she's decided to retire now, so I kind of hesitate talking about a lot of that stuff. It's somewhat in the past.
Interesting.
She made a decision not to continue with the campaign, and she decided to retire, and that happened. So
Interesting.
yeah.
So just as a detail, I've always wondered what happens. Well, I suppose they get referred, but what if you become successful and become judge? What happens to your clients? I mean, where do they go?
Well, I have
probably next door. But.
Peggy can have them. For the most part, since August, I haven't taken any new work. Not great for the bottom line at the mortgage.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I didn't feel like I could focus on this campaign, do the work that I have to do in order to get elected, and be fair to my clients and to give them the representation that they needed. I still have clients, and I've been working on those cases that I already had, but they came first. And I've done everything I need to do for them, and then after that, I've been dealing with the campaign issues. But I didn't take any new work because I didn't have the time, and I didn't feel that was fair to those clients. So.
And then, if you aren't successful and you aren't elected,
well, I'm going to be
what
successful,
then?
so
Okay.
we don't need to go there.
Okay. So you're running unopposed, effectively?
I'm not. No, I am now opposed.
Okay. Who's the opposition?
Well, after Judge Simons decided to retire, two other people decided that it was an open race and that they wanted to throw their hats in the ring.
Okay. What's your opinion of these other two candidates? They were people you knew, obviously.
I've known both of them for 20 years.
Okay.
My opinion is that they're both defense attorneys, have defense attorney history.
Okay. What would differentiate you from them?
Everything that we've been talking about, the fact that everyone had the opportunity in our community to step up last summer, last spring, when all of this information came out about this judge. Everybody in our community had the opportunity. I know the defense community was talking about it and discussing who would do this. In fact, I was asked 3 times and I said no twice. Other people were asked. The conversation was a big one, a serious one. And the other people who now have come into the race, one of them I know was involved in the conversation, the other one I'm not sure, decided not to step up. They made that decision, she made that decision at that time, and that's what differentiates me from the other two, is that I did what I thought was right. And I will always do what I think is right.
In terms of philosophy, is restorative justice in either of their lexicons, or are they more, do you know?
You'd have to ask them.
Okay.
I would imagine so, but you'd have to ask them.
Okay.
We haven't had that conversation.
Yeah. Do you all represent similar kinds of cases?
Yes.
Okay.
Have in the past. One of the 3 of us is no longer doing indigent defense.
Okay.
But
and I guess looking at the main issues in the county, I mean, it's hard to have too much of a conversation in the political or legal arena here without addressing homelessness. It's something that cuts really deep. So do you have any opinion on how things are currently handled with regard to issues of homelessness and such, and how much of an impact or change could you make as a judge on that?
I think that goes back to what we were talking about before. You have to look at the people who, obviously, judges aren't going to have any impact on anybody who doesn't come before them. But once judges come before, once a person who's homeless, if we're talking about homeless people, gets into some sort of trouble and comes before the court, that's sort of what I've been talking about with regard to trying to figure out what they need. Perhaps there's some way we can get them what they need, and then they will be less likely to, continue to receive whatever criminal sanctions that they are, citations or arrests or whatever. But I think the community has the bigger responsibility and unfortunately the bigger challenge. The courts only get involved when people do something that they're not supposed to do.
As opposed to preventative?
As opposed to just being homeless.
And I think the discussions I've had with people around homelessness, it's such a blanket. I mean, it's a symptom, but the underlying causes of it, range from mental illness to, addiction to family issues. I guess of those, can you see restorative justice being more apropos? I mean, obviously, it seems like in, for example, mental health cases, it wouldn't be as applicable necessarily, or would it be more so?
Again, I think you have to look at each individual situation and decide when you're looking at that situation, what can be done, what should be done, what shouldn't be done. I mean, it's got to be an individual decision. Each and every defendant in front of a judge deserves the individual attention of that judge with no preconceived notions about what that judge is going to do on one given set of circumstances or another, because every single situation is different from every other situation, one way or another. I think statistics, people like to bring things together and say, oh, this is the general idea. But when you're talking about people, every single case is different. Every single person is different. None of us are the same. But I think that we can, again, try to figure out what people need, do the best we can to provide it from the community and from the programs, and then do our best. The way that I look at the system is this. and the way that I'd want to approach it as a judge. In criminal court, I want to do everything I can to make sure people don't come back, because coming back is what causes the problems. In family court, I want to do everything that I can to help litigants settle their disputes without losing all their family equity and finances so that it makes more problems than they've solved. And also very important to keep an eye on their children if there are children involved, and make sure that parents are making the right decision for their children, not making decisions in their emotions and sadness and whatever else is going on. And then with regard to civil court, I think that what judges can do is they can help people come to resolutions, again, before having to spend all of their capital on lawyers and courtrooms and time.
So
and
collaborative
everything.
law.
Yes, and I think judges can have a hand in some of that. I think they already do. I don't think that's
Yeah.
anything new, frankly.
No.
I think that's what judges can do. And that's what I want to do. It's what I will do.
Well,
And, I think that's what Santa Cruz County needs. And I think, don't get me wrong, I think there are many judges on the bench that do all those things that I've been talking about.
and you'll do your best to get along with them and collaborate.
I already do
Yeah.
get along with most of them. I've worked
Right.
with many of them. I've
Yeah.
met most of them through this process, and I think I
All right. Well,
get along with everybody.
thank you for joining us. Good luck with your campaign.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you
And,
for having
um,
us.
Thank you for being here to support her.
Yes,
And
you're welcome.
we have a website, which
Yes.
is angel4judge2020.com. So if anybody wants to find out more about me, please feel free to go to angel4judge2020.com. Thank you.
Very good. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode. I'm Datta Khalsa, Community Cafe. We look forward to seeing you next time around.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.